after The Great Mouse Detective, we all know the release of the Disney films after it, right? Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, Lion King, and so forth. Wrong. Between Little Mermaid and Beauty and the Beast, there was actually another animated film that everybody seems to gloss over. The Rescuers Down Under. Even today when I bring up The Rescuers Down Under, everybody says, oh, the little girl in the cave with the skull and diamond, right? No, why does everyone always remember the bland, forgettable one? How ironic is that? I'll admit, out of all the Disney films to give a sequel, it's kind of weird that they did The Rescuers, but you know what? They put their damnest into this movie. This is one of the best looking Disney adventures that has ever come out of the studio, and I have no idea why it continues to get the shaft. Alright, so what's the story? We have a little boy in Australia, who of course doesn't have an Australian accent, who comes across a giant golden eagle, the last one alive. He frees it from a trap, but then a poacher, played by George C. Scott, captures him and tries to force him to tell him the location of the bird. This gets attention all the way from across the world and leads to New York, where Bernard and Miss Bianca, voiced again by Bob Newhart and Zsa Zsa Gabor, are requested to go down there and save it. Instead of using Oval, the bird from the last movie, we instead this time get Wilbur. Get it? Oval and Wilbur. It works. But it works even better when you have the comedic genius of John Candy supplying the voice.
May I just say enchanté, señorita, to you? May I?
This is just another great, passionate role that he gets into, and he's wonderful as always. What Miss Bianca doesn't know is that Bernard is trying to propose to her all throughout the movie, and yet he constantly keeps getting distracted by this other mouse who's trying to put the moves on her. You really feel for this guy. All he wants to do is pop the question and some crap keeps happening to interrupt him. It's more of a cock block than the Legend of Zelda cartoon. Okay, so as you can hear, the story is nothing fantastic. It's just sort of your basic everyday adventure with little mice. Kinda like the first one. Except it's done a million bajillion gajillion times better. Like the scene where the boy frees the eagle. He could just free her and then she just takes him back to the nest, right? It'd take a minute to do. But fuck that shit, we get an intense fall off a mountain, flying through the sky, skating on a river, jumping off a waterfall. Holy fuck. Just watch some of this animation. Yeah, this is what you're missing, folks. How come nobody's looking at this? On top of that, it's a good adventure. It's got some great action scenes, the villain is great. Hey, it's George C. Scott. The main characters are likable, the backgrounds are unbelievable, the animation, as I said before, is spectacular. It's fun, it's funny, it's just a great family adventure film. There was even a short before it with Mickey Mouse called The Prince and the Pauper. And you know what? That's also underrated. It's a really good short. Check it out. I'm sure it's on DVD somewhere. So, okay, why is it this movie gets so overlooked? Well, I got two theories. One is that on the first weekend, the film didn't open very strong, so Disney immediately pulled all advertising from it. So the reason you probably never heard of it is because you weren't allowed to hear of it. Advertising and publicity after that was kept very tight. But I think the other reason it doesn't do so hot is because it doesn't have any of the typical Disney formula. It's not a fairy tale, there's no songs, there's no strong ethics or morals, and it doesn't have any of the extremely cute fuzzy animals that they love to market. I mean, the Rescuers are cute, I guess, but it's no Flounder. But so what? It's not supposed to be any of those things. It's just supposed to be a really good adventure film. And not only is it good, it's incredibly good. Do we look at films like Raiders of the Lost Ark or Terminator 2 as bad simply because they're not as good as something like Citizen Kane? No, they're still celebrated, they're still the top of their class. So how come this one doesn't get any glory? Folks, we gotta turn this around. We have to increase the DVD sales of this movie because you know what? More people deserve to see it. Yeah, it's a family action flick, but it's a phenomenal family action flick. Taking a subject material that really had little going for it and turning it into a friggin' experience. Check it out, folks. You won't regret it. Yet another film that got a lot of people talking about it when it first came out, and then just sort of disappeared. The Rocketeer, a superhero of the 40s that finds a rocket pack and is using it to try and stop Nazis. Well, okay, it's a little better than I'm making it sound. The more appropriate way to talk about it is, Cliff is our hero and he discovers a rocket pack that was hidden in his place. Him and his friend, played by Alan Arkin, test it out and it turns out they really enjoy it and they want to keep trying it. But when the pilot loses control of his plane, it's up to him to save the day, and sure enough, now they got a hero on their hands. But an evil villain, played by Timothy Dalton, is an actor in Hollywood who's actually a spy for the Nazis. They want to use the rocket pack to take over the world by flying around and being unstoppable. Yeah, not the most probable weapon of war, but it's fantasy. Things get worse when they kidnap his girlfriend Jenny, played by Jennifer Connelly, and of course he has to go to take down an entire army, giant monster thugs, and a huge blimp in order to save her. The film definitely has a feel of the 40s, which I think is kinda welcomed. The same guy who directed this also directed Captain America, and it shows. They both sort of have the same feel to them. Even the hero is kinda similar. And speaking of people in this movie, this one has a lot of big names that were not yet big names. But one of the reasons I really like this film is that while you're watching it, you're saying to yourself, these people should be big names. Because they're all wonderful performers and they do a great job portraying these parts. The only one that never went on to anything was the Rocketeer himself, and I feel kind of bad. I thought actually he was a pretty legit lead. I don't know, maybe the part just wasn't written complex enough for him to shine, but I thought he actually did okay. The effects probably use a little too much of the green screen technology, but there's still lots of scenes of him flying around on his own too. Is there a lot of action in terms of punching and firing guns and stuff? Not really until the end. Most of it is just watching him fly around, but like I said, these characters are really likable, and there's sort of a good mystery to it as well. It has a lot of dark, gritty moments, but it has a lot of lighthearted fun also. I get the feeling this film was sort of trying to be a more kid-friendly Indiana Jones, and yeah, that's kind of what you get. Like I said, there are still one or two gruesome deaths in there, but nothing along the lines of Harrison Ford territory. My guess is maybe that's why it didn't quite catch on. I think people probably did want to see him punch out a few more people or see a little bit more of a badass, but I don't know, for a basic action adventure, I think it's fine. It's creative, it's funny, it's got its dark elements, it's got a fun villain, it's got some fun side characters. And I don't think it's grand, but I think it's good. I don't know, if something like Captain America can be released and do okay, I think this one should get the same treatment. So go check it out and make its popularity soar again. Okay, so a lot of you know that my favorite animated Disney film is Fantasia, of course. But if I had to choose one that told a coherent story from beginning to end, cashing in on the Disney fairy tale aspect, then that would definitely have to be Beauty and the Beast. Why? Because everything is done perfect. The main character is perfect, the villain is perfect, the romance is perfect, the songs are perfect. Even the design of the castle, look at that thing! It's like something out of The Haunting, it's just friggin' incredible. But let's start at the beginning. We get a cleverly narrated backstory through stained glass windows, telling us the tale about how the prince, who had little to no love in his heart, gets turned into a beast by a sorcerer after treating her so cruel. He was given a magic rose that is slowly withering away. If he can learn how to fall in love and be loved in return, he'll go back to human. Thus we enter Belle. She's the oddball of the neighborhood because she's hot as hell, but she doesn't flaunt it. She doesn't hang out with other women fawning over men. She just reads her books and doesn't bother anybody, which of course confuses a very gossipy town. That is, except for Gaston. In any other movie, he'd probably be the hero. But here, he's the good-looking villain who has much more muscle than brains. He thinks that because he's the best-looking man in town and Belle's the best-looking woman in town, naturally they should get married. Isn't that great logic? But when Belle turns him down, he swears to get his bride. While that's going on, Belle's father leaves town and comes across an enchanted castle where the Beast lives. But the Beast says he's trespassing and throws him in the dungeon, where Belle finds him later. She exchanges her life for his, and he lets him go. Though the Beast sees this as an opportunity to finally fall in love, he's not very social. In fact, he's downright, well, beastly.
I thought I told you to come down to dinner!
I'm not hungry.
I'll break down the door!
But through the help of some very well chosen and very well paced events, the two actually do start to fall in love with each other. They both slowly start to let down their defenses and start to see the good in one another. Which of course leads to romance, sadness, action, bloodshed, magic, all that good stuff. People fell in love with this movie. In fact, at the time, it was the only animated film to be nominated for Best Picture. That was unheard of. So why did it hit a chord with so many people? Well, first of all, it goes back to the Disney roots, but follows all the way through. It's a fairy tale, and it knows that, and it totally engulfs itself in it. But as fairy tales go, there's a few twists. This time the couple actually has to take their time to fall in love with each other. They don't just meet and suddenly they're meant for one another. And the movie is actually very clever at never saying how long they're together. It could be weeks, it could be months. So that way you're allowed to draw your own conclusions. The villain is a much more realistic villain. He doesn't start off just evil and bad, he's actually the town hero. But as he fails to get his way for longer and longer, he turns to more desperate measures, which leads to one of the more obvious but still pretty poignant lines.
He's no monster, Gaston. You are.
And then you got Belle. Belle is one of the best animated characters ever. She looks good, but she doesn't show off. She's kind, though she has her limits. People mock her, though she could really care less. And she's just off doing her own thing, not giving a shit what anybody says. On top of that, she's looking for something a little more specific than most Disney female leads. And that's something greater than herself. Something grand, something spectacular, something that she can barely comprehend. That's actually pretty deep for a kid's film. It's much better than saying I want a prince or feet or whatever. And it also works out because it turns out what she's searching for is in the very last place she would ever look. Now there is an argument that maybe Belle is too perfect. That she's not really that complex because she doesn't have many problems or flaws. And I'd be lying if I said I didn't see that. She's much more of a role model, the kind of person we want to be as opposed to the kind of people we encounter. But I don't know. If it's still a good role model and the character still seems existable, I don't see much of a problem. I don't really see the downside in liking her. It's that belief in the best of humanity. So for me, I really enjoy her. She's kind, smart, and just does her own thing. I should also talk about the Beast too. I love the way this thing is designed. Whenever I heard the story of Beauty and the Beast before this movie came out, this is pretty much what I imagined the Beast looked like. Very big, very werewolf-like, so I thought he was awesome. I guess if I had to pick one problem with the movie, it would be the design of the human version of the Beast. The animators say that no matter what they put there, the people wouldn't have been happy because, well, they fell in love with the Beast and not this guy. I think that's kinda true, but I don't know. If you put in Eric or Aladdin or something, I don't think anyone would complain. And plus, people fell in love with the Beast because you called him Beast. What's his real name? Did she just keep calling him Beast after he transformed? No, it's a nitpick. Do I really have to explain what else is good about this movie? You all know the songs, you all know how great the animation is, you all remember these characters. It's just a flawless film. As I get older and older, it only gets better and better. It's the pure Disney fairy tale done to the absolute best. I'd say go see it, but let's face it, you already have. By popular demand, Newsies. Talk about a movie people either love or hate. Many of the people I talk to usually have a strong opinion about this movie. It wasn't a critical hit, it wasn't really a box office hit either, but it's gotten a little bit of a cult following over the years. Mostly among girls and young women. The majority of other people seem to really find it annoying and obnoxious, and yeah, I'd be lying if I said I didn't kind of feel that way too, but I don't think it's as black and white as others are making it out to be. It's not something to be ignored or hated, it is something to look at. It's old down New York and a bunch of orphan boys. Okay, I'm not gonna talk like that, but did you notice how annoying that was? That's part of the problem with this movie. But anyway, a bunch of orphan boys get jobs as newsies. Kids that go around delivering papers, selling them, all that good stuff. They horse around, get in fights, they're just a bunch of little delinquents and lovable scamps that you can't help but question why they sing and spin. Seeing the problem yet? Okay, well let's keep going. Child labor laws and unions are threatened when the cost of papers for the boys to sell goes up. So the boys, led by a very young Christian Bale, go on strike and try to see how many people they can get in their cause. At first, it gets no clout, but through a lot of protesting and riling things up, a lot of people, including a reporter, start to get involved and try spreading the word. But that doesn't stop an evil corporate head named Mr. Pulitzer to try to silence them and bring them down for good. Will the strike finally get enough speed and change the world of newspapers as we know it? Do old-time New Yorkers suddenly dance to Alan Menken music? Well, okay, the answer to that second question is no. And as I said before, that's part of the problem, but not the entire problem, surprisingly. This is not a movie where you feel like no effort was put into it. It clearly did have a lot of effort put into it, and it shows. Really look at this choreography, look at how fast they are, look at how tight it is. This is a movie that clearly had a lot of work put into the musical production part. And even to the story's credit, it's not that bad a story. I mean, it's talking about an interesting part of history that very few people know about. And even the actors aren't that bad. I mean, Christian Bale is a good lead and there's a lot of good support behind him. For the most part, but we'll get to that. The biggest problem of this film is that it is in fact a film. But it's not done like a film. It's done like a Broadway musical. And you might be thinking, what's wrong with that? Hell, there's a lot of Broadway musicals that were turned into films. The difference is when that happened, they had to make changes. They did this because Broadway audiences are different from movie-going audiences. And with good reason. In a Broadway show, an actor really has to project, really has to emote, and really has to act big in order for the audience all the way in the back row to hear him, as well as feel the emotion he or she is going through. That creates a very distinct kind of acting that's welcomed in theater, but kind of odd in movies. Even for a musical, which of course we know people don't just sing and dance out of nowhere in real life, it still seems a touch over the top for the general audience to get into. I find this ironic because Newsies is now being turned into a Broadway play, and that makes the most sense. I feel like that's where it belongs. But here, it's just kind of awkward, and it doesn't really suck you into the world that it's creating. Mostly because it hasn't created that much of a world. The city looks like a realistic city, the clothes look like realistic clothes. So when people sing and dance and talk this over the top, it doesn't fit. If they did something more similar to what Chicago did, where they really bring in the fantasy and the illusion and the surrealness of it, it might have had a better chance. But as is, the majority of the scenes are just waiting for the songs to come and go and not really express that much and be a little catchy. I mean, they're not awful songs, but they sort of have that typical Broadway sound that for a movie audience kind of creates a barrier for. In film, you can get close-ups, you can do zoom-ins, you can pan back, you can do all these cool tricks with the camera, but everything is shot at a distance. Again, like it's a Broadway show, and that's not what we're watching. So, the over-the-top songs and over-the-top acting would work if it was in an over-the-top environment, but it's not. It's trying to make it look like a historical-looking New York of the past. And if you don't want to see a movie and instead want to see a Broadway show that has a touch of a cinematic look, then you'll like this movie fine. I think that's why so many girls and young women do get into it. Many are Broadway fans. But if you're looking for a better balance, say like what Fiddler on the Roof did, this one relishes its over-the-top feel-good attitude a little too much and comes off unbelievably corny. So I do kind of feel bad for not liking the film because it's very clear that people worked very hard on it. The music's not bad music, the dancing is good, and for what the actors were told to do, they do it fine. It's just in the wrong medium. And I think those filters really can get in the way for some people. So yeah, I did find it annoying and obnoxious, and I did want to fast forward through a lot of the scenes, but I know there is an audience for this that can get into that kind of acting and that wonderful dancing and so on and so forth. It's just not me. I appreciate the effort, but this is a story I definitely don't need to read all about.